asking me, did I know I was different? And we're talking about 1930 and 1932 and all that stuff. Yes, and maybe no, but yes. And that was the troubling thing, I think, because there wasn't anyone that I could talk to. There wasn't obviously a counselor at school. There wasn't anybody at school. This would not be a subject that one could, I don't know, they'd put you in an insane asylum or something if you mentioned it, I suppose. In the family, this was not discussable. I mean, there would be no context. Obviously not in church, not anywhere. And so not with friends, which maybe meant that I didn't have particularly close friends, because this was obviously very important, but it couldn't be shared. I remember later in high school, I guess, there was a guy, we were inseparable and obviously not in any sense erotic or sexual, but buddies, you know. And I remember saying to him one day, well, I mean, like, since we are kind of going steady, why don't we go steady? And then he never spoke to me again. As a kid, I just knew in so many unmistakable and often difficult and hurting ways that I was different and that I couldn't share this information with anyone. I mean, there was no one to share it with. And so therefore I was kind of a lonely kid. I mean, you can't kind of talk about anything, and then all these experiences are happening, and we didn't use the word queer then, but it really fit because well, high school was hell, of course. There were 4 of us who kind of ran together. And we were a strange group. One was kind of, his family was very rich, and the rest of us weren't. And he was kind of like a young Orson Welles, as I recall it, to me. He was mysterious, and he was different. And one night in his bedroom at home, he put a gun in his mouth and shot his head off. So you had to absorb that information. And then there was John, poetic, clearly gay now. Maybe I was closest to him. And then there was the effeminate guy who ended up not being gay at all and married and had 3 kids. So there were no answers to anything here. In college, I had a very difficult experience because very, very complex. And again, don't ask me why I did this. I mean, I don't know. I just was going with the tide, I guess. I didn't. Anyway, I joined the most macho fraternity. It's odd. So again, I was a total stranger because we had the combined football team, basketball team, baseball team, everything in that fraternity. And there was, I often had lunch outside of the fraternity with someone who was very sensitive and very sweet, as I recall, and we were just friends. Later, he was arrested on a gay charge of some kind, and he hanged himself in the jail cell. But in the initiation and the fraternity, well, I mean, there were things like maintaining an erection and having an egg up your ass or something, and kind of walking around and goosing and masturbation and one thing or another. But this in the macho fraternity, which was sort of sensitive for the young gay kid who doesn't know what it's all about yet and can't share this. So for the non-gay kids in the initiation, it's another ballgame. It's kind of like there was a class, someone came in and was teaching everyone how to masturbate. Well, for the non-gay kid, that would be just a functional thing. For the gay kid, can you imagine the emotion in it and the need for concealment? So it's a very mixed bag. So that was all part of my just personal odyssey. I think my first gay bar experience was probably in Denver. I was a young priest nearby and just kind of figuring out how to deal with it and what to do with it and so forth. And having to do something about being myself. And there was a gay bar, and I remember my heart pounding. And here are men, you know. Well, what are we supposed to do with them? And then I did meet this very sweet guy, a waiter. And well, for quite a stretch, I would come in a Friday afternoon and we'd meet and kind of have a date in the gay bar and then spend the night together in a motel. And then as kind of human beings in some sort of normalcy, have the morning and maybe have breakfast and my goodness, do ordinary things. And then drive back to do the Eucharist and give the sermon in the morning. So that's very tender. And so we went underground and, you know, maybe had a few friends looking for sex and love. That was very difficult. And also, since we were all victims, we tended to project victimhood on one another. In other words, we were not really the healthiest, happiest crew to identify with. Because so often we played out our tragedy in our own lives. In other words, I'm different, I'm inferior, I'm a public enemy. And so if you get too close to me and you're tender, then I must hurt you or destroy you. So it got played out in a very negative, very sad way, I think. What were we supposed to do about this, who we were? And obviously no one could be trusted. And then some men married and had children and were in families and living a total lie and becoming alcoholic or suicidal. I mean, it was a very vicious, very sad cycle that was going on. Well, always, I think I've been creative or somewhat positive in my thinking about anything. And certainly about being gay. I mean, I never settled in my life for defeat or surrender particularly. It just never appealed to me. So I was always looking for options, I think. And then there was my relationship with someone at one point who was gay and an alcoholic. And he died. And he tried. He'd been married and divorced. He'd failed gay relationships. He was brilliant, extraordinary in his profession, and a total failure because the alcoholism got him. And so in my own life, he was a living example of the negative. And many gay men had a negative example in their history and in their background. To middle-class America, homosexual was an image that was universal. And it was two men, don't even say. And don't mention love in connection with this, please. It seemed to be in the 70s. I knew a number of men who, they'd been married. And they'd worked all their lives for the home, the job, the pension, kids, school. And then I've heard recounted the scene so many times where they were with the wife on their knees. I can never repay you for this terrible thing I have done to you. And in effect, she said, just leave the bank book on the table, the mortgage, the car in the garage, and, and don't be in touch. And rather than two sensible people sitting down and kind of talking about it and having some caring and seeing where the love that had been there in so many ways for 20 years might be operative in this situation. So what we're really talking about is immense human tragedy. You know, one of my favorite films is Brief Encounter. And again, this touches gay experience because all the encounters we had were brief. And we were lucky even to have the brief. So I remember my first love. And of course it was heartbreaking. Because that was earmarked for heartbreak from the beginning because we couldn't go anywhere. But we had a year and in New York. And then I remember the parting and the heartbreak and took that for granted. That's the way it was supposed to be. Well, I knew exactly who I was and was working at it and trying to figure out how to exist and make a life. A major element in my coming out actually was to get to the point where there was enough self-respect and dignity to actually come out. Here I was, someone, a super and overachiever in several professions, a huge success by all sorts of standards. Life magazine named me one of the 100 most important young men and women in the United States in 1962, on and on and on. But I had been battered so often in terms of my gay identity that just to come out meant stirring up enough courage and then actually doing it. So it wasn't a fait accompli. It wasn't easy at all. I remember when I came out, and I was actually at the Los Angeles Times one day with friends, and one of them introduced me to someone. And he took my hand, and then he dropped it and glared at me and walked away. Like you're a leper and I want to shake hands with you. You have betrayed morality. You are a public enemy. You're ghastly. You're unattractive. You're immoral. Well, scenes like that just don't happen to build you up as if you'd won the Oscar. Well, I've written 32 books, so I had books coming out. I was on the Today Show or something all the time, in Time and Newsweek, the New York Times. I mean, it was kind of life. And then I was speaking in college campuses all the time. So it was a public life, in other words, and a media life. I'd come out in 1965 without realizing it in Are You Running With Me, Jesus? With the prayer and with you, Jesus, in a homosexual bar. It was not a gay bar at the time. I didn't realize, of course, with the gay network, with the underground, a Time magazine simply published the prayer without comment. So I had come out. Coming out was about 67. So I did move into uncharted territory. And I'm so glad, and it's been wonderful. It is. I would recommend it.